Broadcasting from our office in Buffalo, New York, this is the Arrive Podcast, the comprehensive guide to U.S. immigration law designed especially for our Canadian neighbors. I'm Jeremy Richards, your host, along with my co-host and business partner, Christine Jarusik. We bring decades of immigration law experience helping Canadians to live and work in the United States. We're here to simplify the complexities of the U.S. immigration process, answer your questions, and provide insights that only experienced professionals can provide. In each episode, Christine and I will delve into legal concepts, share personal narratives, and bring you insightful conversations, all designed to educate, enlighten, and empower you as you navigate the U.S. immigration law landscape. Whether you're preparing to move to the United States for work, studies, love, or if you're just intrigued by U.S. immigration law, the Arrive Podcast is your resource for making the journey clearer, simpler, and more approachable. So we invite you to come on this journey with us. Listen to the Arrive Podcast. Follow us on your favorite podcast platforms and subscribe to the latest episodes as they are released. And if you find what we share helpful, don't keep it to yourself. Feel free to share it with others who might also benefit from the content. Our mission is to assist our friends from the North in successfully navigating their way to live and work in the United States. So sit back, tune in, and get ready to arrive. This is the Arrive Podcast, the U.S. immigration law podcast for Canadians. Today we are going to dive into the E-2 investor visa. And the E-2 visa is a unique visa that was created for investors, those who wish to do business in the United States through investment. So either buying an existing company here in the United States or starting up a new business in the United States.
So with this type of visa, one of the things we're telling people when they call in is, the documents are key. I mean, the evidence is all provided in a paper format, submitted to the consulate of your country of citizenship. Not every country has a treaty with the United States that would qualify citizens of that country for this type of visa. So it's important to consult with an immigration attorney to determine whether or not your country of citizenship has the correct treaty in place to make you eligible for an E-2 visa.
And Canadians are on the list.
They are.
Therefore, they are part of the Treaty of Commerce that would qualify you, a Canadian citizen, to apply for and obtain an E-2 investor visa.
Yeah, and that does not go by country of birth. So those of you that are involved in the immigrant visa process, this is a different metric. So this is for a non-immigrant process. This is not country of birth. This is country of citizenship. There's
like
plenty
the TN, right?
Yeah, we've helped plenty of Canadians that weren't born in Canada go through the E-2 and TN process.
Yeah, we have a lot of Indian-born Canadians
we do, yeah.
that do the investor visa.
Chinese born, yep.
All over the world,
yep.
Right?
All these entrepreneurial people that want to run a business in the U.S.
And that's the amazing thing about both the U.S. and Canada is they're melting pots. So there's a lot of people that immigrate to Canada first from other countries, obtain their Canadian citizenship. They've built a life in Canada. They may have a successful business that they started there as a third country national, obtain that Canadian citizenship. And through that Canadian citizenship, they now qualify for this E-2 investor visa, and it allows them that opportunity to then branch off into the United States as well.
Right, either expand or move their business to the U.S. if they think it's a good business move.
Yeah, and so really the E-2 investor visa, and we're just going to narrow in on that today. There are other options to expand to. The L-1 visa is another common one. We'll save that for a discussion at a later time. But the E-2 visa is primarily, it's designed for exactly what it says, investors. Now, what is an investor? Well, it's a person who invests capital into the United States for the creation of jobs as well as doing active business in the United States. And I think that's a key thing to understand with the investor visa. And this is a roadblock that a lot of people run into and they don't understand about investor. An investor isn't somebody who is contemplating making an investment. An investor is somebody who has already committed and made that effort to do business in the United States. They've already spent the money.
What if they only moved what if they took the money that they had, their personal funds, and they put it in a bank account in the name of their U.S. business? Would that qualify for an E-2?
Not committed.
Not committed, right? So
it's just sitting in your bank account. Well, that's still your money.
right.
Committed means I bought a business from Christine and I signed a purchase agreement. We signed a purchase or sale agreement and transferred the funds. And now the funds are Christine's because I bought the business from her.
Right. And now the business is yours.
And now the business is mine. So there was an exchange, right? I paid you for this business and I get the business in return.
Right.
It's not, I want to, I think I might, would this, in the future, I'm going to reserve this money just in case I buy a business. No.
Or people start their own business in the U.S. too. They'll
That works.
incorporate a company. You're the owner of the company. Transfer that money, that personal savings that you have that you want to invest in the business to the company account. But that we can't stop there for the E2. You've then got to spend that money.
Correct. You can't transfer of funds just for the purpose of a future investment. Does
Right.
not count.
And this, spending that money is, it sounds easy to spend money, but we get a lot of calls from people that are like, my business just doesn't need me to, consulting company, for example. All I need is a laptop and I fly around the country and I go to my client's business and I consult with them. So what do I need beyond a laptop?
Yeah, there's a lot of businesses.
Sometimes you
like
have to
that,
get
yeah.
creative. What, do you need a website? Do you need, do you need an office that you maybe need to have employees at this office? There's things that you can spend money on that perhaps you may not need right up front, but that would count towards your investment and help you build that portfolio of receipts to show that your business is ready to operate and you've made that investment and committed the funds.
Yes. So that goes into what are the qualifications. So what are they looking at? And if you're not familiar with the e-visa process, all of the e-visas that are done in Canada, if it's an initial E, so you've never had an e-visa before, this is your first time E, or your E is expiring and you're trying to get a recertification of your business, it's all done through Toronto. The Toronto consulate is the only one that does these. You can't do it at any other consulate in Canada, unfortunately. All new e-visas are processed in Toronto, just like all immigrant visas in Canada are processed in Montreal. So you can't shop around for that. Now, once your business is registered, and that's another discussion, if you bring in an employee through that e-visa registration, business registration, then that can be done anywhere. But that initial one has to be done through Toronto. You can't pick and choose. So let's go into the qualifications. And they have specific metrics or qualifications that are required in order to qualify for an e-visa. And the terms themselves, if you read them on their face, it's not very clear what it actually means. So it warrants a discussion on.
I mean, even
what
when
do
you
these
have an
terms
understanding of what they mean, sometimes it's not clear what they mean.
Yeah,
So
and sometimes the consulate doesn't even know what it means. So
yeah,
that
a
makes it
lot
hard.
of these, and a lot of these terms are contextual. So you have to take them in the context of your business, your field, and your investment. So
Yes.
you go ahead with those definitions. I don't think they're going to be so easy.
Hey, but there's a good thing is if you don't know the definitions and you want to find out, if you go to our website, all of these things that we're going to be discussing today on the podcast are on there. So if you go under our resources and under our blogs,
Yeah.
and you want to know what substantial means for E2 investment, we'll just go on there and type in substantial and search, and you'll pull up what I'm looking at right now.
I don't know if you feel this way about ease, but I find that like out of all of the different visas and the metrics for the different visas and the requirements, it's the most intuitive one. Like you have a sense of whether or not this
Yeah.
business and this individual is going to be successful with this type of application. And I feel like the officers have a lot of leeway with these too, where
They do.
there's not a lot of written regulation about it. And so that they have a lot of discretion in reviewing these types of applications, more so than, let's say, an L1 visa or something like a TN visa.
Yeah, and that can be in your favor. What it does say in the regulation, however, is that it tries to remind the consular, the reviewing officer in the FAM, the Foreign Affairs Manual, and that's where these regulations can be found, is that it reminds them that there is a treaty in place that's already been negotiated with Canada and the United States, and that's what we're talking about right now for this e-visa, and that those terms have already been negotiated. And the whole purpose of this is for the ease of transfer of goods and services between the two countries. So it reminds the officer, hey, this is supposed to be a somewhat, more easily facilitated process because we've had this agreement with Canada. So do they always do that? No. But in most cases, I see they have. And we have several examples where we've helped people with these businesses where you're like, wow, how did that get approved? And it gets approved. So to the question, what is considered substantial for an E2 visa investment?
That's a great question.
I don't want to answer
There's no
that.
easy answer.
So they provide a certain set of guidelines, and there's 3 things to keep in mind if you're trying to determine whether or not your investment would meet this substantiality prong of the E2 investment. So substantial is a proportional sense as determined through the application of the proportionality test. Wow, that's so clear. Sufficient to ensure the treaty investor's financial commitment to the successful operations of the enterprise and of a magnitude to support the likelihood that the treaty investor will successfully develop and direct the enterprise. Pretty vague. So
you read that so fast, I could barely follow it myself.
So in layman's terms, they're saying that the investors put enough into this business, they've committed enough to this operation in the United States that it's going to guarantee the success of that business. Not necessarily today. Here, when they're looking at E2 visas, they're looking at a 5-year business plan. So they're looking at over the next 5 years, has there been enough investment into this enterprise that over the next 5 years that it's likely to employ, and this is a number we throw out, at least 3 full-time workers in the United States. If over the next 5 years you can develop this,
in addition to the owner, right?
In addition to the owner.
Yeah.
And we're not talking your family and friends here. We're talking you're hiring U.S. workers as full-time workers. You're not bringing in your mother, father, brother, sister to work in your company. That's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about employing U.S. workers, at least 3 full-time workers. That's substantial. Mm-hmm. So what do you have to put into this company to guarantee it's going to get off the ground, it's going to get clients, generate revenues to the point you're going to employ at least 3 full-time workers? That's what substantial is.
Well, that's going to be dependent on the type of business, isn't it?
And that's where the proportionality test comes in. So, and they give a proportionality test. So, and they give some examples. So, for example, an investor buys a convenience store with a total cost of $65,000 US and invests $65,000 US into the enterprise. The investment is 100% and would be considered substantial. So of the investment, it was a $65,000 investment. The investor is a sole investor and puts all $65,000 into that investment. And that's about a rough cost of, I would say, buying a convenience store in the U.S. It's somewhere between 60 and 100 is where we see these. It could be a little bit more. That's considered a substantial investment if you can show that that business is also going to generate or create jobs and for U.S. workers. Now, it goes on to give the next example of an investor who buys a warehouse tied to their logistics company for a total cost of $1 million US and invests $500,000. So we're talking a lot more money here.
But also only 50%.
Only 50% instead of 100. But they say although the investment amount is 50%, it may still be considered substantial based on the amount of the investment. Now we also have to look at ownership too. That's another key factor. You need to maintain if the company has to have at least 50% of the nationality of the person seeking the visa. So that's the minimum. So here, let's assume that's at least 50% and right to control this company, and they put in $500,000, then that would meet the requirement because that is a substantial amount of money that would be considered sufficient to guarantee the success of this enterprise. And then the final example they give is an investor buying a shopping mall for a total cost. And I think these are actually my examples because we've done each of these. They don't say shopping mall, but we did one.
You did do a shopping mall, yeah.
Who buys a shopping mall for the cost of $100 million and invests $10 million in the enterprise. Although the investment amount is only 10%, it may still be considered substantial based on the amount of the investment. And here, let's say that...
So it's a $10 million investment. at the end of the day. So
pretty
even though it's
hefty.
only 10%, as long as that person still has some
Right to control.
right to control,
In the example here, this individual owned the entire shopping mall, but their down payment was
Gotcha.
10 million.
yeah,
Right.
that makes sense.
And you can assume that here in these scenarios too. Maybe
Right.
your down payment is 50%. Well, if that down payment is sufficient enough, if it's substantial in their words,
Mm-hmm.
then it could meet the substantial requirement in this proportionality test. As
Yeah,
they call
and
it.
not to give an example of things that wouldn't work, but for example, if that $10 million investment was in the shopping mall and there were 9 other investors,
Ooh, that gets hairy now.
yeah, you're going to have a tough time with that E2. In fact, I don't know that you would,
Because
your documentation would have to demonstrate that you have a right to control. Even then, they might not buy it.
yes, and that goes to one of the other factors of an e-visa, right? The company has to have the nationality through ownership of the investor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to do this as a Canadian, the company also has to be Canadian, which by definition means that it's owned at least 50% by Canadians as a group, and they have the right to control.
Right. So the entity is still formed in the U.S., right? It's just
Correct.
the ownership of the company is by Canadian citizen owners.
At least 50% with the right to control. Easiest way is 51% or more, and then you don't have to worry about right to
That's
control.
what I usually tell
Yeah.
people too.
51%, you're fine. Then you don't have to mess with it.
I know, but I've
If
also
you get 50%, they often challenge it because
they can, unless you have something in your
bylaws or
articles,
something,
that dictate that you have right to control. My example went out of my head, but the other thing I was thinking of is a situation where somebody is investing in a company that has owners of multiple different nationalities, maybe different ownership percentages. People have come to me and said, do I have to get proof of citizenship of all these other owners? And I tell them, yes, you do.
Yes.
Well, they're not going to give me their passports. Well, if you want the E2, you need to get a copy of every passport from every owner to show their citizenship.
Yep, that's a requirement.
Yep.
You have to prove nationality. Again, it goes back to one of the requirements that you have to prove the nationality of the company.
Right.
In order to do that, well, what is everybody's citizenship? And it goes down to percentages.
It does.
Right? If you have 9 people, it could work as long as
Maybe
50% or more
as long as 5 of them,
are Canadian.
if they all have equal shares, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Could work.
All right. So that's what substantial is. Are you putting enough into this company that would be considered a substantial amount that would guarantee the successful operations of the company? Okay, that's what they're looking for there. And then the next factor that they lay out is what is called marginal. So we're getting these immigration specific terms. So what is marginal considered? And this is the one that goes back to employing U.S. workers. Marginality. And we get this a lot for people that maybe in the real estate market, right? A real estate market, and they want to invest in properties in the United States. Well, let's go to the definition for marginality, and then we'll talk about that. So marginality from the FAM, the Foreign Affairs Manual, again, says an enterprise that does not have the present or future capacity to generate enough income to provide for more than a minimal living for the treaty investor and their family. An enterprise that does not have the capacity to generate such income, but that it has a present or future capacity to make a significant economic contribution is not a marginal enterprise. The projected future capacity should generally be realizable within 5 years from the date of the application commences normal business activities of the enterprise. So what does that mean? This goes back to creating jobs for U.S. workers. If you're coming into the United States and you're just investing in a property and it's just you and you're gaining investment from that, and that all the revenues are going to you and you're not employing any U.S. workers, maybe you're buying an apartment, you sit on it and you flip it. Well, that doesn't qualify. You're not creating jobs for anybody. You have a lot of people that will want to come and they do the reno thing. They'll buy it and they'll go renovate it themselves, and then they'll sell it, and then they keep flipping houses that way. That doesn't work for an E2. You have to create jobs.
Even if you're you're hiring contractors to do it, which is what most people do. Is I'm going to hire all kinds of U.S. contractors to
Very good point,
build the
because
house,
Canadians
so
love contractors.
Yes, no, that's not an employee. That's a contractor, and that's not going to qualify you in most cases for an E2 investment.
It had to. You can have contractors, but you also need to have
employees.
And when we say employee, for you to understand, that is a T4 employee.
T4, which in the U.S. is called W2.
Yes, it's not a contractor or 1099.
Same form though, saying that you're paying the taxes for this employee and you have them on the books.
So if you're buying a little company or you have this enterprise you're doing in the U.S. and it's just making money for you, that won't qualify you for an E2. You have to show, and here it says present or future capacity to realize that in 5 years. And we stated this before. They want a 5-year detailed business plan. It has a market analysis and everything in there that details, what your projections are going to be. Year 1, I'm going to hire an office manager and, admin. And then year 2, we're going to add laborers or whatever it is, and you can point out specifically all these people you're hiring over the next 5 years. And that at a minimum adds up to at least 3 full-time W-2 employees in the U.S. Amazing. And if you can add 1099s on top of that, well, that's going to make it stronger. Yeah. So it's not saying you can't do those 1099s or those contractors, but you must have full-time employees as well.
And let's talk about the 5 years, because you keep going on about 5 years. The reason is because they're going to approve you for a period of 5 years.
5-year business registration.
So that's why they're looking at that period of time. And the good thing about the E is that really gives you a lot of time, proportionally to other types of visas to grow the business.
If it's an L1 expansion visa, you get 1 year.
1 year. 12 months is not a lot of time to get a business up to a position where you're having that number of employees or more. It's probably required for an L, but...
and there's no time limit requirement either with the E. Some of the, like L, sometimes you have to pay attention to how much time you're spending in the U.S. Like if you're spending more than 50% of your time in the U.S. on that visa, then other rules apply. Whereas the E, doesn't matter how much time you're spending in the U.S. You can spend 100% if you want.
Right.
And it gives you 5 years instead of a year.
Yeah. But you don't, the downside of the E is you don't get to renew it at a border with a border officer with the same day approval. You've got a more lengthy process, more scrutiny. But you also have more time to build your business. So,
yeah. And once it's established and you have people hired, then the renewal process can be pretty seamless. So it's a legitimate company and you're doing business, everything's on the books, you've hired U.S. workers, and you can show tax returns and W-2s and records of business in the United States. Well, the likelihood of you getting that extended for another 5 years is high.
Yep. So, that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing on the E.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we tell people to do.
Not over their 5-year period. Though.
No, well, sometimes businesses fail. It happens.
And sometimes people use it incorrectly.
That's true.
So that's marginal, substantial and marginal. Substantial, did you put enough money in this company to make it successful? Marginal, are you hiring employees in the U.S.? Is this not just for you?
To support your family?
Yeah. Are you just moving your family to run your own restaurant? That doesn't work.
I mean,
unless you're hiring workers.
We get calls like that all the time. I want to move to Florida. How can I get there? Are you in the position to make an investment? Oh yeah, I'm going to buy a house. That's going to be in my investment. No, that's not how that works. What if I hire a landscaper to landscape the house and a painter to paint the house? No,
contractors. They're not your employees. Yeah, we get that a lot. Thank you for tuning in today and listening to the Arrive podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, share it with your friends and other people out there that you think might find our discussions helpful. Also, remember our website. We have a resources tab on there, and you can subscribe to our resources. We have blogs that we put out every week. At least 3 come out every week. And then you get immigration updates on there as well. You can also tune in on YouTube. If you Google us on YouTube, Richards and Drusik, you'll find our YouTube videos too, and you'll find a lot of helpful information there. Also, this is a plug for you. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit for us to address on the podcast, please let us know. Also, if you want to be on the podcast, we'd love to have you as a guest if you want to have your question answered live. We keep asking, not a lot of people want to take that up. But hey, it would be great to have another live person on here as well, and we'd love to have you. So thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't, please hit us up, subscribe, and keep listening. And if you are, thank you. So on to one of those user-submitted questions. And this is one that we receive quite frequently. And that is, can you use a 3-year degree? And here, the most common one we see is India, but it can be from any country outside of North America, a 3-year degree. Can you use that 3-year degree to qualify under the TN profession of a computer systems analyst?
The answer is no.
No.
Yeah,
Because the minimum, what are the minimum requirements for computer systems analysts under the TN profession?
So you need to have a bachelor's degree, which by definition is a 4-year degree.
A 4-year, equivalent to a U.S. 4-year degree or North American 4-year degree.
Right. So a 4-year bachelor's degree, or you can have a diploma or certificate from Canada or Mexico plus 3 years of experience.
So where does 3 years fall into there?
So the 3-year Indian degree would not be qualifying as a diploma or certificate. So
and that's where people get confused. They're like, wait, it's higher than a 2-year diploma. Well, you're right,
True,
it is.
Yeah.
But it specifically states in the regs that a diploma has to be from Canada or the United States. And it specifically states that a certificate must be from Mexico.
Right.
So if you have a diploma, certificate, or 3-year degree that's not from Canada, Mexico, or the United States, it's not going to qualify. It doesn't meet that qualification. And then a 4-year degree.
Just so our Canadian listeners are clear, the diploma is going to be from from a college. So like Seneca College or something like that. They'll issue a 2 or possibly even a 3-year diploma
in computer
science or computer networking. That plus 3 years of experience working in that field, that's going to qualify you for a TN. You don't have to have a bachelor's degree to be a computer systems analyst.
But if you do have a bachelor's, you don't need 3 years experience.
But if you do have a 4-year bachelor's degree,
yes.
You don't need...
Not 3.
Right.
Correct. So, yeah, the answer is no. You can't use a 3-year Indian degree or a 3-year degree from outside of North America to qualify for TN status as a computer systems analyst.
But you could use a 3 years bachelor degree from Canada to qualify you.
Plus
your 3 years of experience.
Correct.
Right.
And one last thing to note on this question is if you're doing a degree evaluation, it's best to get that equated to a U.S. degree. They will accept them to a Canadian degree if you have one. Some people get it because they immigrated to Canada and they use it there. They will accept those, but that's at the discretion of the officer. The best is to get a U.S. equivalency.
Yeah, and it's not that much more to do that. And we have a place that does pretty quick turnaround, so...
Yeah, plug for Silvergate evaluations if you need an evaluation of your your degree. That's who we typically work with. Where I was going to is you can't combine. So if you have a 3-year degree, you cannot combine that with a certificate or experience to get an equivalency to a U.S. 4-year degree. The degree must be evaluated on its own.
I have had some success. And correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, if it's the same institution. So, for example, you have a 3-year degree from India.
And a master's from the same institution.
And you have a master's, 1-year master's degree from the same institution. They will accept a combination of those 2 degrees. But if it's from a different institution, maybe it's the next university down the road in the next town over, they're not going to accept that.
Yeah, they won't. That's considered combining.
Yeah.
But if it's the same institution, and I've had border officers tell me the same. As long as it's the same institution, it's acceptable. But otherwise they won't. But even then, you could get an officer that looks at that and says, no, I don't want to take it. So it's discretionary at the border. You got to be careful.
There's a lot of nuance here. So I think the takeaway should be if you're a computer systems analyst coming into the U.S. and you're not clear on whether or not your qualifications are going to meet the requirements,
give us a call.
Yeah, you're better off just calling and checking first.
Yeah. And then on to a recent success story. We just got this. I think this approval came last night. I was
congratulations
hanging around the house and I got an email notification, USCIS. If you file cases for premium processing, they give you email notifications, and it was an O1B.
So I saw that come through. Yeah.
An O1B, if those that don't know, is for somebody of extraordinary ability. So you have to show this individual has risen to, and what I say is typically the top 10% of your field. And you can demonstrate it through prizes, awards, articles, publications, and there's a lot of criteria.
High salary is another one, yeah.
So this individual is actually coming to the United States from Italy, and he's a chef. He's actually a pretty, somewhat renowned chef who's participated in some cooking shows and written cookbooks. I mean, I've seen the pictures of his food. I'd like to taste it. It looks amazing.
Well, where is he going to work?
He's going to work in Miami, Florida.
We need to take a trip.
At some really posh restaurant down there. So I'm not quite sure if we could afford to eat his food.
He might do us a favor though, right?
But yeah, that's a good one. And that was approved with no request for evidence from USCIS. It was approved in about 10 days. One of our associates, Rachel, she actually helped me on that case and did an amazing job. So that was a good one to see. And it was a cool one, right? A unique one. A pretty those are the fun cases to work on that aren't the, routine ones when you get individuals like that. So that was a fun one to work on. All right, now back to our discussion on the e-visa. Now, let's say you've established the criteria for the e-visa. What happens at the end of the e-visa process? And we get this question all the time. I just had 2 e-visa prep calls here in the last few days, and we talk to our clients before they go to their final e-visa interview. What to expect during that interview? Well, typically by the time you show up to the interview, the way the e-visa works is you submit everything electronically ahead of time to the consulate. So they've already reviewed everything. And if they need something else, they'll let you know. For example, we got a request this week. We're doing an e-visa for an individual, and they wanted an updated resume. And they'll request something like that ahead of time.
Yeah.
And you just submit it, and then they'll review it. And then once everything's satisfactory, they'll schedule you for an interview. Now, they've already reviewed and done their due diligence before you show up to that interview. They've already reviewed the entire submission and made any requests for additional evidence that they typically have before you show up. So when you show up to that interview, and I've done a tour of the Toronto consulate and had them explain the process, and I've walked through it and seen what they do, you just walk up to a window and...
Yes, it's just like a carol.
In 5 minutes, they're telling you what your decision is. They could ask you very brief questions. Who are you? Oh, what's your business do? Oh, how many clients do you have in the U.S.? Oh, what's your business? Basic questions. And then they say, okay, approved. And then they take your passport, and typically within 30 days, your passport comes back. And this is one of the only times a Canadian actually receives a visa foil in their passport or stamp in their passport. The photograph, the fancy looking visa is when you get an E2. And then they'll mail it back to you.
I've got someone going tomorrow to the consulate, so I hope it goes just like that.
Hopefully. But the denial or refusal goes just as quick.
Yeah.
They'll tell you, you're refused. And sometimes they give you a detailed explanation of why they don't think you made it. Maybe they said, oh, your investment wasn't substantial. It didn't meet the marginality test. Your funds weren't committed. And that's another prong of the e-visa is, are your funds committed? And we talked about that. The funds can't just be in a bank account. They actually have to be spent and committed to that investment, right? You had to actually sign on the dotted line, transfer the money into escrow, or actually paid for before they'll issue that visa. And there's actually one more prong that we didn't discuss, and they could refuse you on this, is you didn't demonstrate that this is non-immigrant, right? E2 visa is a non-immigrant visa, meaning you're just coming for the purposes of managing this investment. You're not intending to immigrate. You need to show you maintaining your ties to Canada, and your intention is not to abandon your residency in Canada, but your intention is to manage this enterprise. So if all those boxes check off, congratulations, you're approved. If not, they could refuse you, and they could refuse you for any of those reasons. They would also refuse you for reasons outside of the e-visa qualifications, right?
Very true.
And sometimes we get blindsided, and this is a plug. This is just a PSA for all you out there. If you're working with an attorney, be honest, be straightforward. Let them know your entire history, because if you show up to that interview and you have a criminal record and you didn't disclose it, it could make you inadmissible. So you go through all this work to get an e-visa, and then the consulate says, hey, you know that 7-Eleven you robbed and you held up with a gun? Yeah. Well, that's a crime involving moral turpitude, and you're inadmissible to the United States. Denied.
Right. Or, remember when you stayed in the United States for 20 years during the 80s and 90s?
And you didn't have a visa?
Leave the country and you didn't have a visa?
Yeah.
It can impact your case. I even had someone who
remember when you were a little kid, or you think you were little, you were 17 and you
think you were little.
You were smoking weed and you got caught and you're arrested for it? You need to disclose that, because it keeps
you need to tell your attorney about this stuff, because you know what, sometimes there's ways we can address this, and we can prep you for that kind of a question in the interview, or if it comes up, or tell you what you need to do to address it. It's harder when we don't know what's going on.
And there are waivers for a lot of these things. I gave some pretty extreme examples.
You did.
You're not going to get a waiver if you're holding up a 7-Eleven with a gun. That's probably not in the cards for you. Or if you're killing people.
I don't know.
Or
If we talk
trafficking.
to Shauna, she might be able to help.
Maybe. Shauna can do some amazing things, but within the law. So, yeah, you make sure you give full disclosure to your attorney so there's no surprises at this interview, because the negative is you could get denied. Right, you go through all this experience, and you commit all these funds. You buy this business. You pay for an attorney, and you were never going to get approved in the first place.
Yeah.
And then,
I mean, you even really need to, keep in mind about your travel history too. I've had people that have been in the U.S. on multiple different visas in the past, thought nothing of it. Maybe they had a mild overstay once or twice. But they did travel, maybe for work to some pretty sketchy countries.
Countries on the list.
That are on the list. Yeah, the bad countries. And, they get put into administrative processing for security reasons just because of that travel history. So
sure you
even
don't have any
something as innocent
affiliations.
as that
Yep.
could torpedo an application if it's not dealt with correctly.
And with this process, one of the huge advantages of an e-visa is your family gets to come with you.
Yay.
20. So it's a dependent. They're under 21.
Yeah.
Okay. If your
Wife
kid's
and
21
children.
or over, sorry, they're adults. They're not coming. They're on their own. That's the way it works. That's the way it should work. They're adults. I'm kicking out my 21-year-old today.
You sound like the parent of a 21-year-old.
That I'm driving across the country literally tonight to move. He's moving across the country to be on
Well, you're
his own.
putting him as far away from you as possible, huh?
About 3,000 miles. So
But he's not moving back in your basement anytime soon.
he's going out. So hopefully,
You're going to have some notice if he does anyway.
I hope so, because we're going to do something with that and make it so you can't move back in anytime soon. So your family members, 21 and under if it's a dependent child. If it's a spouse, they don't age out. They're always your spouse.
Right.
They will get what's called E2 dependent status. Now, the spouse is special. They'll get
Yeah.
an E2S.
Yeah.
Not for spouse. Well, for spouse, but it also means special. Because that S means they get automatic work authorization.
Right.
Which is amazing.
They don't have to apply for anything. As
No,
soon as
and they can work
have
anywhere.
That visa, they can use that as proof that they can work in the U.S. for any employer, for you and your E2 enterprise, or for somebody else, entirely different.
And sometimes, and we have a lot of couples strategize who the investor is when it's a husband wife, right?
Very true.
So one of the husband will be like, well, we just own this business. We're going to have other people run it, but I want to do this on the side. Well, then our advice could be in that situation, well, have your wife be the investor. You hire a manager who's going to manage that enterprise. You get the E2S yourself, and then that'll let you do another side business or whatever, work for another employer on the side if you want.
Right.
So there's ways you can leverage that. So it's a huge advantage for an E2 investor is that spouse designation is automatic work authorization.
Absolutely.
And the visas, what happens is this: your company will become an e-visa registered company for a 5-year time period. And then you will be issued a visa stamp for 5 years. Now, when you enter the United States, they only stamp you and admit you for a 2-year period of time. And then at the end of the 2 years, you simply return to the border. They will ask for proof that your business is active and operating and running. And then they'll give you another 2-year stamp all the way up until the final 1-year stamp. And at that point, you would then seek a redesignation of your company at the consulate and get another 5-year business registration. And this whole entire time, you need to keep in mind that this is non-immigrant. You shouldn't be giving any impression that you're coming here permanently. And there actually is no path from an E2 visa directly to a green card. It doesn't exist, which is odd.
There are paths, but that's not through your E2 registered business, right?
Correct.
So I've had plenty of E2 people
You
marry
transition.
Americans and get their green card through family. So that's
Correct.
a different pathway. Or perhaps there's another pathway. They have another U.S. Employer finds that wants to buy their business and employ them and will sponsor them for a green card that way. But not your
Not a
E2 registered
direct
business
path
can't
through the E.
petition you for
Correct.
a green card.
Like an L visa if you're an owner, L1A, executive manager,
Yeah.
there's a direct path to green card.
Right. Your L1 business can petition you for that green card.
Not
But
an
you're-
E2 business. So you need to plan for that. If that is your goal, you need to have an avenue to go from that E2 to that green card. If your purpose is strictly investment and managing your investment, well, you can be on an E2 visa till you die.
Yeah, we have plenty of clients that have been here for like 15, 20 years.
Yeah, as long as that's active business,
Yeah.
you're employing U.S. workers and you're maintaining your ties to your home country and you're not immigrating, you can keep renewing it indefinitely.
It's very true. And sometimes it's a good path to get into the United States if you have a family petition pending, or you're
Yes.
starting one that's going to be one of the longer ones, like a
brother or
sibling,
sister, 15
or you're an
years.
adult child of a
Yep.
U.S. citizen. Sometimes you make the investment, come in, run your business for 15 years, and then you can transition to the green card once your priority date is current.
Yep.
And we have plenty of clients that do that as well.
Yep. And we have this one too, where maybe for some reason you had a child who was born in the U.S. and you're waiting until they turn 21, right?
Yeah, that's a good
and
one.
then they come in and do an e-visa while they're waiting. Their kids may be in college and wait till they turn 21, and then the kid will then petition them for a green card.
Yeah, that's a good plan too.
So there are some creative avenues you can take to get there, but directly from the E2, there is no path. So
Right.
keep that in mind.
And I think the path really is, like, if you look at the immigration context of all the different avenues, is the EB-5 investor
Correct.
visa, right? So
It's gone up to 1.6
yeah,
million.
so you would need to have an investment of 1.6 million to qualify for that
And
pathway.
it takes years.
It
They're
does.
on
It's-
hold right now. I don't know what the backlog
It's so
is. Like
it's so much
3
fraud.
or 4 year backlog.
It's so much fraud, and
They're effectively on hold right now.
Yeah.
So good luck. There are better routes. To me, if you're doing that route, right,
yeah,
I like the L1 visa route, right? You have a Canadian company that you're operating on. Most of those people do. A lot of them will shut down one and then open one in the U.S. Well, don't shut it down. Keep it active. Open up a U.S. branch. Transfer yourself to the U.S. Once that U.S. company can support a permanent full-time manager, it'll petition you for a green card. Boom, you're done.
then you can close Canada.
And
But let's
close
keep
Canada.
the United States open for a while and work on that.
Yep. Until
I had a client who
you
did
have
it,
the
and
government audit you.
didn't go well. Yeah.
Wait, there's no business.
Yeah.
So that's an L visa discussion, and I don't think we've had an in-depth one on that. We'll get to that one in the future.
Sure.
That's one of my favorite options. We've helped tons of people use the L1 visa to get the green card, but unfortunately, this E2 investor route we're talking doesn't allow for that. And renewing the E visa is similar to obtaining the first E visa. You go back to the consulate in Toronto. You're going to submit proof that the company is active operating. They're going to want tax returns, T4s, proof of doing business, in order to do a re-registration for another 5 years. Thanks again for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our podcast, rate us, review us. Also, check out our resources on our website, where you'll find a lot of helpful information, and you can also find us on YouTube. And again, if you want to submit us a question, we'd love to have your questions so that we can answer those live on the podcast. And if you yourself want to be on the podcast, we'd love to have you and answer your questions live on the podcast. So back to another user submitted question. And we talked about this briefly. If, let's say, at the end of your e-visa process, you are refused for administrative processing, and we hear administrative processing a lot, and we get a lot of people saying, hey, I went to my immigrant visa interview or my non-immigrant visa interview, and my case status has changed to refused administrative processing. Well, what does that mean? I wish I knew.
It's
It means
black hole.
it means be patient. Administrative processing could mean many different things. It could be they want to do a further background check of you. They want to look more into your investment. They want to look more into your relationship. It depends on what you're applying for. It could be any number of reasons, and they don't even have to have a reason at all. And they don't even have to provide you a reason to put you in administrative processing. The bad news is if you get put in administrative processing, you can't even make an inquiry or try to move that along until after you've been in administrative processing for at least 6 months.
Yeah.
A long time. So, our best advice is full disclosure to your attorney before you file for anything, so that you can be prepared to hopefully avoid administrative processing. At the same time, you can't avoid it. You could have what appears to be a perfect application, and then you get put into administrative processing because there's something that the officer wants to look into a little bit more.
Yep.
Most cases, though, we see if it's a standard administrative processing, usually within a few weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, I would say. Most people are out if it's a basic administrative processing. Now, if you look into criminality issues and other security, that kind of stuff, it could be a long time before you get out. So administrative processing, that's the black hole of immigration. And unfortunately, there's no straightforward answer to how you're going to get out of there. And you can't do anything for at least 6 months. And we had another recent success story, and this was a kind of cool one. And this goes back to the L visa that we were talking about a little bit.
Yeah,
Christine.
we have a Canadian company as our client, and they recently expanded to the United States, and they opened their first U.S. office. And the owner of the Canadian company needed to come into the U.S. to manage and hire for the new U.S. office. So we were successful in getting that person an L1A visa to come in and manage that U.S. branch of the business. And in addition, he needed to bring in some more technical people with him in order to, work with U.S. clients, the new U.S. clients he was taking on. And so we also got a few TNs for some scientific technicians, technologists, engineering techs to come in with him in order to do that work for their U.S. clients as well.
And that's a good strategy. So a lot of people think, and dang, I wish our AC wasn't broke. So you're listening right now, man, what's that, 82 in here? Whew.
Do you want me to go grab a fan?
No, we're good. We're almost done. But it's getting hot. That's a good strategy because a lot of people think that, I'm on an L, so everyone else I bring in has to be on an L. No, that's not necessarily the case. You could bring in an employee under a different visa classification if they qualify. You could bring them under a TN. You could bring them under an H-1B potentially. So just because you're on an L and you've got that for other employees, if you need to bring in another one, there could be another, or an O, like I mentioned before, for the O we just got. Maybe the person is an O caliber.
Right.
So that's a good strategy that I think a lot of attorneys do overlook, is they get caught into this, rabbit hole, or they pigeonhole somebody into this option of L.
Yes.
Oh, so everyone else has to be an L. No, that's not the case.
Right.
And sometimes you have companies, you could have an E-visa registered company and also
TN employees,
have a TN employee or an L employee.
Very true. Very true.
You could apply. You could qualify for all of that.
It needs to be assessed on an individual basis.
And I'm actually working on a case right now where the investor, he wants the E-visa, but the wait time to get an E-visa is about 3 to 4 months to get an interview at the consulate, but he needs this now. He also qualifies for an L, but it would be an L1 startup, which is only a 1-year visa, and it's not ideal. He wants the 5-year, and he doesn't want to live here or immigrate here.
So
he just needs
the
this
L
to do business.
To get him here quick,
Yes.
and then you do the E to keep him here long
term.
Yeah,
exactly. So he's going to come in on the L, get everybody here, while he's submitting the e-visa applications in the background.
And he's making his investment. He's here to manage the investment while he's doing that. I think it's a great plan. We've used it a number of times successfully.
And then he's going to go back to the consulate, get issued his e-visa, and then be all set. So, yeah, good strategy. Don't think that there's only one visa option that works. There could be multiple if you're lucky.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely.
All right, so final tidbits on the e-visa. What are some of the common reasons that these get denied? What are the ones that we've seen? What do you think? What are the most common reasons for denial? I know I have a few. I think the biggest one, this is the biggest one, and I've seen people do it many times.
What?
Is they don't commit the investment.
Right.
They put the money in a bank account, and then they submit an application to the consulate saying, I want to buy this gas station. The consulate reviews it, and they say, well, you didn't buy it yet. You have to buy it.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, but the money's in a bank account. Doesn't qualify.
Right.
I can't, and we already talked about this, but this is one of the most common reasons.
Oh,
you don't commit the funds.
I have one I heard of. It is the person paid the money not to the seller of the business, but to their corporation that they were purchasing. So they were essentially paying themselves.
Yeah.
And the E2 officer
Caught
did
it.
not approve that.
Yes.
That one was
you're
caught.
paying yourself. Yeah, that doesn't work.
You're paying a company that
You
you're then
own.
taking possession of.
Yeah.
So the money is yours
Yeah.
again.
Your company must buy that company different way around.
Well, you have to pay the seller of the
Yes,
company,
not yourself.
not the company you're purchasing.
And we get
Right.
a lot of, and that's another common one too, is
And that's
people,
that is a mistake on the level of you did not hire a business attorney to manage this transaction. That's
Yes.
I did this job myself. I went to one of those online legal Zoom
or
to
whatever.
get documents. I recently had a client whose documents were, let's just say they were difficult to decipher. And so I asked him for, if he was using a business attorney to prepare these, because I'd never seen such shoddy work before, but he wasn't. He was preparing them
do it on their
himself. And when I asked him who his attorney was, he sent me some registered agent in Arizona. His business isn't anywhere near Arizona, so I'm not sure how that was chosen, but it was, it just complicates the process. It makes it longer. We're flat rate fee, so we're getting paid, the same amount, whether we do a lot of work or a little work. But the frustrating part for the client is it's not moving fast, because I keep having to go back and say, this needs to be changed. That needs to be changed. You need to send me this. I need that. And they're getting frustrated. It certainly is frustrating from our side. So you definitely want to get a good business attorney.
and that leads to
in the
another one
roster.
too. Yeah. So
Yeah.
don't create these docs yourself.
No.
Don't do it. When we negotiate a lease, guess what? We hire an attorney to review the lease for us, because that's not what we do. We do immigration. When I have a few kids adopted, guess what? I hired an attorney
Yeah.
to do my adoption. That's not what I do.
I had an
If I get-
echocardiogram yesterday, and guess where I went? The cardiologist.
I could.
I didn't do it
I could have
myself.
done that for you.
No, because you go.
You may not be alive, but,
Yeah, that sounds not fun. So
or you have your
I'm
vet.
pretty
do
sure
it.
you wouldn't know what
Have your
was
vet do
showing
it.
on that cardiogram. What?
Have your vet.
My
do
vet,
it.
yeah.
Or your friend,
My friend.
who's had one done before, and you get that a lot. Oh, I've got an e-visa before. Let me advise you. No, that's a bad idea. Bad
Yeah.
idea. Use professionals.
Yeah.
And this goes to business plan too. And that's another common reason. You could have all your documents in order and then you submit it, and then it comes down to marginal. Why? Because your business plan wasn't specific enough to state what your growth would be over 5 years and specifically detail how many employees
Yeah,
you're
that
going to
usually
hire.
happens when people do their own business plans. So
Bad idea.
here's what we recommend. You hire a business attorney. It doesn't have to be expensive. They can just do the documents for you. They don't have to, and advise you on a few things. It doesn't have to be super expensive. And the other thing is you hire a business plan preparer, and we have recommendations for those. So
And just like us, and you hire an immigration attorney for the immigration part. So
Yeah.
each piece must be done by the professional who has the expertise to assist in that area.
yeah, we're definitely not business attorneys.
Accountant too, right? We're not accountants. We get asked accounting advice and
Tax
people
questions all the
tax
time,
questions.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, hire a cross-border accountant who can advise you. You should be hiring professionals when you do all of this. My father's a mechanic, and he gave me this advice long ago as a kid. He was a John Deere. That's who he worked for. He said, Jeremy, if you own a Ford, you take it to the Ford dealer. You own a John Deere, you take it to John Deere. Why? Because if a John Deere comes into the John Deere dealership, he can listen to it. You can tell him, he knows exactly how to diagnose it and fix it, because that's what they deal with all the time. You bring in a vehicle or something they're not used to, or you're going to pay extra time and money for them to even figure out what's going on. And even then, they may fix it wrong, because that's not what they deal with. Same thing applies here. Hire the expert who has expertise in what you're looking for. You'll save yourself a lot of time and
yeah.
money.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And frustration.
yeah, and frustration. and I think the other, and we already hit on this, I would say one of the other common reasons for denial is not having full disclosure. People
True.
go in and they don't
Yeah.
present the investment as it is, or they don't present their background as it is, and they try to get past the consulate.
Didn't
lying.
you have a client that had like all kinds of fraud charges that came out
Yes.
at an interview once?
Like the
And they
e-visa
were like,
application we submitted was perfect, but then they denied it on the basis that this individual had committed some visa fraud through some business that they owned in the past as the basis for the denial of the E. Well,
Yeah.
you got to disclose that.
Definitely.
Don't commit fraud.
Yeah, don't we? I would say that just because your attorney doesn't ask you for specific information about your past visa fraud doesn't mean you shouldn't tell them.
Full disclosure.
The obligation's on you to bring it up.
Yeah. So those are probably the biggest pitfalls we see. And there are others too, and we could probably keep going on and on about it, horror stories about that. But in the end, we've had e-visa success stories from small single or sole operator companies that do $50,000 a year in business up to multi-million-dollar companies that get e-visas. There is no business that doesn't necessarily work for an e-visa. It could be an existing business that you're buying. It could be a new business that you're starting up. Maybe you want to start a consulting company. Maybe you want to start a hair salon. We've seen everything. The sky's the limit with any. As long as it's legitimate and it's backed by professional documents and legitimate investments that you can prove, then it could be possible.
Keep every receipt and every credit card transaction and every bank statement, because we're going to ask you for them.
That's funny, because the one example I have, she's one of my favorite clients. She's a little old lady. She does saddlery and stuff.
I think you've talked about her before.
We have.
Yeah.
She doesn't do a ton of business. All of her stuff's handwritten. So Sharon, she's one of our paralegals. She's been working with her for years. We've been doing our e-visas. Sharon's very patient, and she works through all these receipts and compiles it all, but totally old school. But it's all documented.
Yeah.
It's not computerized or electronic like most of us, but she has it all.
Yeah.
It's
And she probably doesn't transfer the money through 3 different bank accounts before it gets where it needs to be. I don't understand why that happens a lot.
I got this money from my father, and then my and
then I transferred it to my bank account here, and then I transferred it to the business account, and then I transferred it back to me. I invested it.
Don't do that. It's clean of clean of a trail.
You want to make it as
easy
for the officer to review as possible. You want to serve it up on a silver platter so that all they can say at the end of the day is this is approved.
Yep. ABC done.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in today. And listening to us ramble on about e-visas. Hopefully you found it insightful. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Give us a rating, review us, recommend us to your friends, and tune in next time. Next time we will be discussing more about E2 visas, and we will go specifically into the top 10 frequently asked questions that we receive about E2 visas. So if you found this, overview of E2 visas informative, and you want to continue to learn more about e-visas, tune in next time when we go into details of those top 10 frequently asked questions about E2 visas. Thank you for listening, and hope you tune in next time. Have a great day.